Hello and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. I'm your host Mark Philpott, and on the show I speak to people all across the world about their travel related experiences. Yes, indeed. Welcome everybody. It's really good to have you here. If you're a first timer with the show, welcome. It's great to have you on board. I'm glad you finally found the Global Travel Channel podcast show. Head on over to our website for all the episodes you've missed at www.globaltravelchannel.com. Easy to remember. And while you're listening to our episodes, don't forget you can vote in our 2019-2020 Global Travel Channel Podcast Awards. Yes, we're doing our first awards this year, and you can be part of the action. All you need to do is submit your votes via our website, and you could be in the running to win a prize. It's that easy. Yes, indeed. So on the show, I talk to incredible people about their travel experiences. We get inside the human being and we find out what it is they learn from travel. Not only just the wonderful places they go, but we hear sometimes people's life journey around travel, and today's show is no exception to that rule. The lady who is my guest has been traveling her entire life, right from her early schoolhood days. So we're going to go back to that period in her life, and we're going to follow her life all the way through, and how travel has been instrumental in helping her become the woman she is today. So, without any further ado, let's welcome my guest to the show today. Her name is Sonja Bolger. Sonja, welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really thrilled with myself then. I didn't call you Sophie again.
Yeah, well, honestly, it does happen all the time.
Why is it, I wonder? Because they're not really that close, are they, Sophie and Sonja?
I think I guess it's just the first two letters, but I guess Sophie's a more common name, so people kind of always seem to go that way.
Yeah, right. Okay, fair enough. I'll use that as my excuse actually, and in calling you that. So, how are you going today? Good?
Yeah, doing well. It's 9 o'clock on the dot in the morning here, so I had to get up bright and early. Although I do have an alarm clock in the form of a 1-year-old, so it wasn't too bad.
Well, you better tell my listeners all over the world. We're going to 97 countries around the world today. You better tell them where you are exactly at 9 o'clock on the dot in the morning.
I am in Scotland.
Scotland, fantastic.
Yeah, I live just
Scotland,
outside of Edinburgh.
Outside of Edinburgh?
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful part of the world. And I've had, as you're probably aware, I've had some wonderful people from that part of the world on the show recently.
Yes, I may or may not know them quite well. Yeah, we're quite a tight-knit little bunch over here, so it's nice to be able to join the show as well.
It's really interesting because I think I said to one of them on one of the recent shows that I think there's more travel bloggers per capita in Scotland than any other country in the world.
Really?
Well, it appears that way. I've just been flooded with them on my show recently. So
yeah, I guess we have our own sort of little community. We all keep in touch over here, so I guess we share a lot amongst ourselves. And also, I mean, Scotland's a beautiful place, so it's not really hard to be a travel blogger here either.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people listening already would have worked out that your accent means that you're not originally from there, and we're going to get into that shortly. But I'm first of all going to ask you to, on my show, I always let my guests dedicate their particular episode to someone special in their life. So who would you like to dedicate your episode to today?
I will dedicate my episode to my son, actually.
Your 1-year-old?
Yeah, well, he's 16 months now. I still call him a baby, but he's fast approaching toddlerhood.
And what's his name?
I actually don't share his name.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
On social. No, well, I call him Baby B, but obviously that's going to have to change at some point. But I just think, just for like, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. So I thought at the moment his name is under wraps.
Under wraps, fantastic. Mm-hmm. I wish my mother had done that for the last 50 odd years. I would still be going around as no name. That's a brilliant idea. Well done. I applaud you for that. Well, I'll tell you what, when he's grown up a little bit more, you're going to be able to put a set of headphones on him, and he's going to be able to listen to this episode and think how lovely it was of his mummy making the dedication to him for this show.
Yeah, it'll be nice.
you might be able to sit down together and listen to it.
Yeah, hopefully. All going well.
Brilliant. Okay, so you've dedicated the show to your son. We know that you're just outside of Edinburgh in Scotland. And tell us where you are from originally.
I am originally from New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Yes, a small-ish town in the North Island called Fielding. And yeah, but I've lived abroad quite a lot, so somehow ended up over here in Scotland now.
Well, we're going to talk about your entire journey, actually, because I have been stalking you for your entire life, and I know exactly where you've been.
Yeah.
But I want to start off by saying, were you born in Fielding?
I was, actually.
You were, okay.
Yeah.
So we were born exactly 223 kilometres apart.
Oh, okay.
So today we're probably about 18,000 kilometres apart as we're speaking today, but we're actually born about 223 kilometres apart. I was born in New Plymouth.
Oh, nice.
Which you will know is just up the road.
Yes.
And it's actually not just only 223 kilometres that I can tell you about as the distance between New Plymouth and Fielding. Now, for people listening around the world, I should be a little bit more polite and just suggest to you that Sonja and I are talking about our beloved country, and if you're looking at a map of New Zealand, we're talking about two places in the North Island, so that's the one on the top, and New Plymouth is on the point that sticks out on the left-hand side, and Fielding is down below that, basically, and just a little bit inland from the coast. So that's the area of New Zealand we're talking about, and I've got a really random fact for you here today, Sonja.
Okay, hit me.
Do you know how much it costs to get from New Plymouth to Fielding on a bus these days?
$15? No idea.
$33.
33. What?
$33. Does that blow your mind?
It does, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. So we've got lots to talk about. Now, I can't go on any further without saying this. Your family name is very famous in New Zealand. And I need to ask you, are you connected to Mr. Bolger or Mr. James Brendan Bolger? You're not?
Not that I know of. It's my married name.
Okay.
And so my husband's family is Irish, although he's born in England and his father's born in England, but they're from Ireland. And apparently it's a very popular name in Ireland.
It is, yeah.
Yeah,
and the Prime Minister of New Zealand that we're talking about, Mr. James Brendan Bolger, was actually, his family was born in Ireland, and he's from Ireland.
Yeah.
And they moved out to Opunaki in New Zealand, which is just up the road from Fielding as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know really. I mean, I'm sure if you went back, there probably is some connection, because apparently it's sort of a small kind of area that everyone's from. But we don't know what it is. But over here, it's not a very common name, so it's often mispronounced, which I find really strange, because no one in New Zealand ever mispronounces the name.
So how do they say it in Scotland?
Bolger.
Bolger?
Often. Yeah, I've had Bolger or all sorts of different things.
Whereas
to me, it was a very well-known name, but apparently not.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've just cancelled out 50% of the show because I'd made all my show notes on you being the daughter of Mr. James Bolger. But you're not, so we can definitely go on to something else. Now let's go back to your early childhood in Fielding. Can you remember your first kind of family holidays away around New Zealand? Where did you go to on some of your first trips that you can remember?
So I was very lucky in that my grandparents had a beach house, a batch as we call it in New Zealand, out at Akatea. I'm not sure if you know where that is.
I don't even know where that is. No,
it's kind of off the beaten track, we'll call it. It is out from Dannevirke, so it's on the east coast of New Zealand.
Yeah, okay. I know where you are now.
Yeah, and they had a beach house out there where I spent a lot of my childhood, and still try and go there every time I go back to New Zealand. So that was my first trips. We're always over to this beach house and the beach, and you had to drive on a metal road to get there still. And yeah, that's kind of my first memories of travelling, was to go there.
How old were you then when you used to go over there?
Well, apparently the first time I went there, I was 6 weeks old.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I obviously have memories from being sort of I guess probably 4, 5 at the earliest, at least, sort of running around on the beach and up to the beach house and that sort of thing with my grandparents and my parents and my brother.
Yeah, fantastic. What's the name of the place again?
Akatea. Akaito.
Okay. I had never heard of it until now, and I feel completely embarrassed as a New Zealander.
No, you shouldn't. It's just one of the little beaches kind of over that way. There's a lot of little beaches that you had to travel kind of through a lot of farmland, and there's not a lot of people live over that way. So
I was going to say, it sounds like, and knowing that area a little bit, it's pretty remote along there, yeah? So
it is, yeah.
Does it get many tourists at all?
There is like a holiday park there, or a camping ground, and it does get quite busy around the New Year and that sort of thing, but I think it is more of a local place, so I'm probably letting the secret out a little bit.
Okay.
But they do get tourists that come by in camper vans and stay in the holiday park at times, because it's quite a nice place to go. It's right on the beach. Yeah,
sounds idyllic. I used to go, we had similar, I guess everybody in New Zealand did this. My grandparents had a batch as well in Whitianga, which is up on the Coromandel Peninsula. I used to go up there all the time. That was still to this day some of the best days of my life were spent there doing all the stuff on the beach and the black sand and everything else.
Yeah, that's what this is like to me as well, all your happy sort of childhood memories.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, getting back to fielding for a moment, I had to ask you before, do you know the Maori name for fielding?
Oh, I don't, but I bet if you tell me, I'll be like, yeah, that's it.
It's Arorangi.
Yeah, see, I did know that.
But what I didn't know when I was researching this is that Arorangi means about 15 different things in New Zealand.
Okay.
So Mount Cook is actually Arorangi as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's a whole list of other things. I can't remember what they all are. But so if you're ever wanting to go to fielding and you think you're going to be smart in using the Maori name, be careful, because you could end up somewhere else completely different.
Yeah, way down in the South Island
it's
somewhere.
Not going to happen. Okay, so over to the East Coast was your first memories of travel. What about overseas travel? Where was your first overseas trip to?
Like many Kiwis, it was to Australia, to the Gold Coast, to be exact. When I was 7, we went on my first holiday, and I kept a diary, actually. And it's funny to look back on it, all my little 7-year-old memories of this trip to Australia and to all the theme parks and everything like that.
Yeah, fantastic. Is there anything in that journal that you can share with us on the show today that you can remember?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. I mean, I wrote some like observations of the flight, and I distinctly remember reading one, and I tried to be poetic even at 7. Something about like the clouds floating on the glass and of the sea or something like that, and I was just reading this as an adult going, oh, what was I doing?
Beautiful. So you were actually a travel blogger at age 7.
Yeah, well, Air New Zealand gave us a diary on the plane, and so that started my travel blogging adventures, I guess.
Fantastic. And was it something that you were immediately into? Like, did you enjoy doing it, like making this diary of your trip?
Yeah, I loved it. I stuck all like the ticket stubs in from all the places that we went, and I wrote little things, and we actually returned to Australia, to Sydney 2 years later when I was 9, and I had another diary for that trip. So
wow.
Yeah, I obviously really enjoyed it.
And you've still got all these diaries?
I do. Well, I hope my parents have them somewhere. They move about a lot as well, so they've had to cart my things to a few different places, so hopefully it's still amongst them somewhere.
I love the way the parents get that job, because you're a grown-up lady and you still get your parents to carry your journals around for you.
Yeah, they have all of my childhood things still about the place.
Fantastic. So what was it about those overseas trips when you were 7 and 9 that you really loved about travel, like getting on a big plane, I guess, and going to bigger cities and things like that? Yeah,
it was just exciting. Like, it was such a different experience and these different things, and I loved, I just remember the experiences of walking along the beach, and it was totally different in the way, like the air felt different. It sounds kind of silly, but like, it was hotter, like just this total difference to what I was used to, and I just really loved it. Doing new things all the time.
So did you have to get up at school and make a little presentation after you went to Australia and tell all your fellow classmates about your big trip?
Probably. I don't remember, but I know that was a thing. It would have been like the show and tell of that week. Like, who wants to talk about what they've done last week?
Yeah,
So.
I had a similar experience where I went to Fiji when I was about that age, and we had no formal process for doing that at school where you got up and shared your trips, but I made sure we had, and I got up and told everybody, even though most of the class didn't even want to hear about it. But I had I had one of those, what do they call them? Those things they put around your neck in Fiji and stuff. And I had one of those, and I wore it to school very proudly and told everybody about my big trip.
Oh, that's nice.
Now, you had a bigger trip when you were at high school. You went on an exchange to the United States. Tell us about how that came about.
Yeah, that one was a bit of a weird one. It's still something that I can't quite believe that I did. I think I must have been about 15 when I applied to do it. I went through a program called AFS, Exchange, and I've been running since the end of the Second World War, organising exchanges to try and kind of encourage people to live abroad and to meet other cultures and that kind of thing. And they came and did a talk at my high school, and I just thought, yeah, that sounds good. I could do that. And I went home and said to my parents, what do you think about me maybe applying to go and live overseas for, at the time, I thought 6 months. And I thought they would say no. And they said, oh, that sounds like a good idea. And then I sort of thought, oh, okay. So I did the application and I thought, oh, I won't get in. And then I got in. And so it somehow kind of just snowballed. And before I knew it, I was on the plane and I was going for a year to live in the United States.
Fantastic. Whereabouts did you go to in the US?
I went to Kansas.
Kansas?
Yes. Which whenever I tell anyone I went to Kansas, they're like, really? Kansas? Why? But I do have to, I guess, wave the flag a little bit for Kansas and say I had an amazing experience there. It was a kind of real life. I feel like if I'd gone to LA or New York or something like that, it wouldn't have been kind of as just normal life. And it was a really great experience. Everyone was so friendly. Everyone was great. They had no idea where New Zealand was. They didn't even know that people in New Zealand speak English, but they were lovely and friendly, and it was great.
So tell us a bit more about the trip. How old were you when you went off and did this one?
I was 16 by the time I went.
Okay.
And they sort of recommend that you go for a year because it means that you get to experience a whole year of high school over there instead of having to leave partway through. And you sort of only feel settled at about 6 months. So I ended up deciding to go for a year in the end. And I think I was 17 a couple of months after I arrived over there. So it was a bit of a weird experience and showing my age as well, because at the time, there was no kind of Skype or anything like that. My parents wrote me a letter in advance that was waiting for me when I arrived. And it was like long distance phone calls, maybe once a month to sort of update them on what was happening. But yeah, no social media, nothing like that. So it was a much more remote experience.
Sweet. That's really sweet. They sent you a letter for it to be there when you arrived there. That was fantastic planning on their behalf. Yeah,
I think it was like something that they sort of recommended that, your parents do if they wanted to, so that you sort of felt a little bit like, I don't know, welcomed when you arrived, but it just made me cry at the time.
I bet it did. Now, at this age, at 16, you were already a professional jet setter. You'd been over to Australia and done all that a couple of times. So how was it taking the big bird all the way to the United States? Do you remember how jet lag affected you and all that sort of stuff from the trip?
Yeah, I can't remember too much. I mean, it was a really long journey because they sent us on like a weird sort of route to get there, and I had to stay a night in Houston before I flew up to Kansas. So I think I had most of my jet lag when I was in Houston, and I was just staying in a hotel with all the other exchange students that had all arrived into this hub, and then we were kind of flying out to our separate places in the States. And I remember the Olympics was on at the time, and we all were just kind of sitting there like really like glazed eyes, like watching the TV, the Olympics, like trying to, no one sort of, it's a really weird experience. You just left all your family and your friends behind to go and live somewhere that you've never even seen, and absolutely nobody. And it was a bit of a weird experience, but great.
So I bet it was exciting, though, to be in the United States of America for a year as a 16-year-old student and having the opportunity to, regardless of whether you're in Kansas or anywhere, having that opportunity to just live in a completely different culture at that age. It must have been so brilliant. How did you feel as though you changed as a person during that time?
Yeah, it was amazing. I think by going abroad at that age, I really grew up a lot. Like I lived with a host family. I lived with the same host family for the whole year, and they became like my parents. They are like parents to me, still. But you still, you know, you are on your own still, in a lot of ways. So I think that I really grew up a bit, and I gained a lot of confidence. Having to put myself out there and try and make new friends again when you're a teenager is not the easiest thing to do. And I think it sort of just broadened my worldview as well, because I wasn't the only exchange student at my high school. There were students from all around the world, different places in Europe and South America. So I got to meet people from other places as well, which was amazing.
Were you a extroverted type of person back at school in New Zealand before you left, or were you a bit of a shy one?
I would probably say I was a bit of a shy one. I did drama and I loved doing drama, but outside of that, I definitely wasn't that extroverted. Like I had a good group of friends, but that was kind of me.
Did you get homesick badly when you were in Kansas?
Yeah, like I think that's one of the times I can really remember being homesick. Excuse me. I think that for the first week or two, I just cried like every night, but not because I was like sad, but I think that's part of it. It's like the emotional toll of being somewhere new and having to like speak all day and be thinking all day about all sorts of different things, and people asking you questions all the time is quite exhausting. And so I think it was like that made me feel homesick in a way, because it's like you just want everything to be like normal rather than kind of having to be thinking about things all the time because everything's new and a little bit different.
So how did you adapt to that whole US kind of commercialism and capitalism compared to sleepy old Fielding in New Zealand? Well, I don't want to say sleepy old Fielding, you know what I mean, in terms of quieter, country town Fielding in New Zealand versus being thrown into the mix of American commercialization. How was that to you at that age?
Yeah, it was very different. It's a weird thing because like part of the reason I wanted to go to the US was like I guess I'd grown up seeing like movies and reading books and all these kind of things, and you have this sort of idealized view, and in a lot of ways it lives up to it. Like you can do anything there that you want to do, like the American dream sort of thing, like everything's there to buy to consume, and so it was quite different. Like there's all these different like foods to try and different things to do, and I don't know, I went shopping a lot. And my host sister and I, we used to just we'd go shopping all the time, and it's not something I really did as much in New Zealand, and we ate out every day. Like every lunchtime we would drive to a fast food place from school and eat out. And it was very different to what I was used to.
So you were hanging out at the mall, were you?
Yeah, basically, and eating a lot of fast food.
And did the host family have a child your age, or how did that work?
They did. I was really lucky. So my host sister Sarah was, she is only 6 months younger than me. And so it was kind of really good timing, I think, for me, because we were in the same year at school. She introduced me to all of her friends, which was obviously really nice. And we did a lot together, and we're still in touch. And I was a bridesmaid at her wedding a few years back. So, yeah, we still talk all the time.
Brilliant. So when you got home from that experience after a year in the United States in Kansas, how did you feel as you had changed as a person in terms of, obviously you'd grown up, but what were some of the other emotional behaviours that had changed in you, do you think?
That was when I had my first sort of experience with reverse culture shock. And they tell you, like in the program that I was in, they give you lots of information, like this might happen, like you might feel a bit of culture shock when you return home. And I definitely did. It was really strange because for a year, I'd been living this new life and I'd been growing and changing, and I felt like things were so different. And I returned home after a year and everything was just like exactly the same. Like nothing had really changed. Like, you know, a few things, you know, we were in a new year at school. I did go back to school for 6 months when I got back, and I found that really difficult to settle back into school. In New Zealand, like some of the friendship groups had changed slightly and people had got closer to other people while I was away, and I wasn't really a part of a lot of things anymore. But like in many ways, like, you know, I'd had this great experience and I wanted to talk about it and share about it, but no one really cares. And so it was quite interesting. It was a tough one for about a few months, just to get used to like being back in New Zealand again.
That's really interesting because, you know, in a high level understanding of these exchange programs, you wouldn't have thought too much about that particular issue, but it's a real life one. And now when you start to talk about it, it's very obvious the kind of impact that it can have. And you are talking about extremes here. You know, you're talking about the United States of America versus going back to New Zealand, right? So yeah, there's probably not too much of a wider gap that you could get in terms of those two different experiences that you could probably have. But you got back to New Zealand, and it wasn't too much longer before you had your next overseas trip associated with education. Yeah, you're off to, where did you go to next?
I went on a study abroad when I was at university, and it was to Victoria, which is in Vancouver Island in Canada. Basically, I had the travel bug, and I was determined to go somewhere else as soon as I could. And when I found out that you could do an exchange at university, I was like, yep, that's me. I'm doing that.
Fantastic. So did you obviously had to apply for that again, did you, and go through that process?
Yeah, I did. The way it works at university is that, well, the way it worked at my university, which was Victoria and Wellington in New Zealand, was that they have agreements with other universities overseas so that you can go and study at those universities and you still just pay your tuition fees at home. So it's not really any more expensive than studying at home, other than obviously your flight and then any difference in living cost. But it means that it's actually a really cost-effective way to be able to go and live overseas. So I applied for it, and like you pretty much get accepted as long as your grades are okay, and as long as there are courses at the other university that you can do that will translate back for your credit at home. Yeah, right. So, yeah,
fantastic.
I was determined that I would go somewhere, and I was lucky enough to be accepted to go to Canada.
So, what time of the year were you doing your semester in Canada?
I left on New Year's Day, and did that semester, the spring semester, I think they call it. In Canada, and so I was sort of there from January till about the end of May.
Ouch. Cold.
Yeah. It was an interesting one as well, because where Vancouver Island is, it's like quite close to, you know, lots of people know that Seattle is known for being a really rainy sort of place, and Vancouver Island is pretty much close to Seattle. So it was a lot of rain. There was snow, but not like a ton of snow where I lived. It was just mainly rain.
Well, the reality here is that you actually came out of Wellington, New Zealand, yeah?
So I wasn't
climate-wise, you were a little bit ready for anything, weren't you?
Yeah, basically. It was pretty similar, and it was actually a really good experience traveling at that time, because I knew I only had a limited amount of time there, and so I was determined to do things even though the weather was like terrible. So that kind of stuck with me. So now I actually love traveling when it's like winter or like not that good a weather, and it doesn't faze me. Whereas if you'd maybe asked me before that, I would have been like, no, I want to travel when it's nice and sunny.
It's what I love to find out about from my guests on the show as we talk about your different travel experiences, and you're a great case of this because you've spent all these different chapters of your life doing different travel experiences for different reasons. So I'm really interested to know how each step changed you as a person, how you became more savvy as a traveller. Like by the time you went to Vancouver Island and after doing trips to the Gold Coast and at 7 years old and then going to Kansas and all the rest of it, you must have got a bit of, travel savvy up by now and started to take some shortcuts and being able to move yourself around. What are some of the things that you kind of picked up along the way to make that whole travel experience better for you?
Yeah, like I think quite a few things, I guess. It was sort of knowing about that you have to look at different visas was one of the first things, because I had to do that. And then figuring out how to find accommodation, because I did a lot of little trips while I was in Canada, and that's when I sort of ended up staying in a lot more hostels. So I guess I sort of started doing the backpacking thing then, and being able to find accommodation and plan trips, and also being able to make friends with people as well. So you sort of, I don't know, as a traveller you have your sort of standard travel questions, but that was my first experience of that. Like everywhere I would go and you start to talk to people, you'd get those standard questions of like, oh, where are you from? How long are you staying here? What are you doing here? Where are you going next? All those standards. And that was my first experience of that. And I was like, oh, okay. And this is how you can start conversations with people. Which, for someone that is a little bit more introverted before all of this, I think that was really important to sort of learn those things as well.
It's almost like you need a dictaphone that you can just press on and they'll replay all the answers for all these questions that you get, right?
Oh, I know. And I travelled a lot with a girl from Germany. Her and I were quite close while we were studying abroad there. And because we were from different places, like we'd have to do the whole thing twice. So we started just answering for each other, and the person would assume that the other person was from New Zealand or from Germany as well, until one of us would have to speak, and then it would have to start all over again.
Yeah, right. Good game.
Yeah.
Good game. So put you on the spot now. What experience did you prefer, the Kansas one or the Canada-Victoria one?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I really don't know if I can pick because they're so different. I think because with Kansas I was still at high school, so I still, was living quite like a normal life. I did do some trips with my family, but it was kind of more just normal life. Whereas when I was in Canada, I really tried to make the most of it, and I was traveling every weekend and going somewhere new, and that sort of thing. And I was an adult, and I was responsible for myself. So that one was probably a little bit more exciting because it was sort of a shorter trip, in context, and I did a lot more things in that shorter amount of time, like travel.
So what are a couple of the places that you went to while you were in Canada that really blew your mind away? What are some of the top spots you visited?
So I did quite a lot of travel around Vancouver Island itself, which is a beautiful place. It's about, if I remember rightly, it's about quarter the size of New Zealand, so it's not massive. So you can see quite a lot of it in like one trip. But it's beautiful, beautiful scenery. It's like that Pacific Northwest. People sort of know that kind of scenery from the States. Well, it's like that. So you've got these beaches with these huge forests next to them, and it's quite beautiful. So we did a trip to a place called Tofino on Vancouver Island, which is really popular, but for good reason. And a lot of surfers go there, but it's just a beautiful beach town, and it's a really nice place. And the other place I went was a place called Salt Spring Island, which is one of the islands between Vancouver Island and Vancouver. There's a whole group of islands there, and I had no idea that these existed before I went there. I would never have known. Like when you think of Canada, I definitely don't think of islands really, or small islands at least. And they're called the Gulf Islands, and this one, Salt Spring Island. Same thing. It's just a beautiful little place. The locals are like really friendly. A lot of people just hitchhike around the island because there's not a ton of public transport, but lots of things to see and do, like lots of little there's an art trail, like people really into sort of the arts there, and there's also like craft wineries and breweries and cheese making places and mountains to climb and beaches and kayaking, and it was great.
Yeah, fantastic. Sonja, just before we go on, I'm picking up a little bit of a rustling sound from your end. Have you got something in your hands or on your desk or something?
I might have been moving my hand around.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's just,
I will try and stop.
That's all right. It was just getting a little bit louder and louder and louder.
Okay.
So I didn't want it to, but that's fine. No problem. I just wanted to make you aware of it, so that's all good.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to it, and we can just start into that again. I've got a question for you, so we'll go 3, 2, 1. So, that's a very beautiful part of the world, and I'm a boat guy, and there's some fantastic places up around there for boating, and whether it be sailing or powerboat as well. There's some wonderful places to go all the way up to Alaska, actually, when you think about it, because
have you been around
really
that way yourself?
I have, yeah. I've spent quite a bit of time over there, and in fact I've been looking at St. Juan Islands and all around there as somewhere that I might like to be doing my podcast show from. So
nice.
So who knows? It's lots of places on the bucket list, but we'll see whether we can make it happen.
Yeah.
So after Canada, so you came back to New Zealand again after that?
I did, yeah. It was my last year at university when I did the exchange, but I came back and I was studying law, actually. Completely different to what I do now. But I was studying law, so I came back so I could do my course to be admitted to the bar in New Zealand.
Okay. And what happened with that? Why did you step out of law?
Well, I really enjoyed doing law. I'm quite analytical, so it sort of appealed to me. But I was never sure what kind of law I wanted to do, like what kind of lawyer I wanted to be. But I enjoyed doing it at university, and so I just kind of kept going. And I wasn't quite settled on what I wanted to do. And when I finished university, it was only a couple years after the recession. So that was fun times of trying to find a job. So I just sort of took whatever I could get, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go traveling again as soon as I can, and I'll go traveling, and then I'll get a job in law later on. And here we are. That's never quite happened.
The best laid plans never come to fruition, they say.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your favourite legal TV show?
I don't know, actually. When I was at university, we used to watch Boston Legal all the time.
Yes. You nailed it. You don't have to say anything else. You've got it.
Okay.
Alan Shaw is my absolute number one guy on TV. I just love that guy. I think the way that he plays that, he plays that role is just... you think the guy's a lawyer, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm going to have to go back and watch it as well. I've been thinking about it lately. I'm like, what can I watch again? I'm like, that would be a good
Boston
one.
Legal. Boston Legal, absolutely. It's a no-brainer when it comes to legal shows. Boston Legal is so fantastic from so many different dimensions, that show.
Yeah.
So there you go, everyone. Go out there and binge some episodes of Boston Legal. It's really good stuff. So you wanted to go travelling again. So where did you go travelling again to?
So my ultimate dream was to move to the UK, actually. And I can't really tell you when that started. I think it was probably not too long after I'd lived in the States. I'd always wanted to move to Europe and like explore Europe. And I thought, obviously it's easier for Kiwis to move to the UK, and we can get a working holiday visa when we're under 30. So I thought, well, I'll move to the UK for a couple of years and I'll travel around Europe and it'll be great. So that was my kind of ultimate goal. But working in New Zealand, and I wasn't earning a ton of money. So I made the leap over the ditch to Australia and lived there for, I think, almost a year, saving money so I could make this kind of ultimate dream come true. And luckily for me, my parents had decided to move to Australia a few years before. So I moved to the Gold Coast and slept on a couch in their living room for that whole time so that I could save to move to the UK.
Now, just for the sake of everybody listening today, this journey that Sonja is sharing with us from New Zealand to Australia is something that is done very regularly. It's they actually call the Gold Coast West Auckland nowadays because there's so many New Zealanders living on the Gold Coast. And it's pretty much, I don't want to say it's one-way traffic, but there's a lot of Kiwis. I think there's a lot more Kiwis in Australia than there are Australians in New Zealand for sure. But I know the Australian numbers up going to New Zealand have been increasing over the last number of years, but don't quote me on that one. So you came over to Australia, you made some money and bludged off your parents for a while, and then you took off to the UK, did you?
Do you know, I paid rent to live on their couch.
As you should.
Yeah. Admittedly, it was not a lot, but I did pay. But yeah.
I guess they weren't going to sue you, were they?
No, exactly. So I worked in the Gold Coast, and it's a lovely place to live, obviously, as well. And then saved my money and booked my flight.
Did you really like living on the Gold Coast?
I actually did.
Really?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think
Give
I
me
was
fielding
lucky.
any day. Give me
Yeah,
fielding
well,
any
see,
day.
it depends. Like, I didn't live anywhere near Surfers Paradise, which I think is key. Obviously, it's a nice place to go on holiday. But I lived, first I lived in the northern part of the Gold Coast in a place called Labrador,
Yep.
just north of Southport. And then I moved, and then I lived in the southern part as well. And I think there's some really nice areas where there's not as many sort of tourists around, I guess, and there's lots of really great food over there. The weather's good, you can go swimming all the time. Even if like the Australians look at you like you're crazy, you can go swimming all of the time, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So okay, how long were you on the Gold Coast? Couple of years?
No, only about 10 months I think it was in the end, maybe.
Oh, okay, so you saved money pretty quick.
Yes, I was lucky.
Yeah,
Got a good
good.
job working for a university, and just like my friends and I just wanted to go backpacking through Southeast Asia on the way to moving to the UK. So we just like saved as much money as we could that year. Anything that we did, we did on the cheap.
Now that's a very unusual thing for Kiwis to go backpacking. So you ended up in the UK, and what was the plan then as far as jobs and stuff goes?
This is where I have since learned from my mistakes. I didn't have a big plan, which was, looking back on it, I was very naive with my move to the UK, which was, you wouldn't think so after having already moved abroad before. But the times I'd moved abroad before, I'd always been going to study or going, I stayed with my family. So this was my first time like really, really going it on my own. And I saved quite a lot of money, but I had no idea of what the living cost was when I was moving over, really. And I ended up signing myself up to live in a flat and burning through my savings because it took me a lot longer to get a job than I thought it would. And so looking back, I would do it very differently now than I did then. And I always tell people that as well. I was lucky. I did land on my feet in the end. I got a job, and I in Edinburgh, and I loved living here, and it was great. But yeah, not big plans.
Now you had a stint in Spain as well, teaching, is that right?
Yeah, I did. So you can only stay in the UK for 2 years on a working holiday visa from New Zealand. So at the end of that 2 years, I had to leave, and I was not happy about it, shall we say. But I ended up going back to my parents in Australia, and to try and figure out what exactly I wanted to do. I had sort of lots of thoughts about maybe moving to Ireland or somewhere else, but I'd had on my mind for quite a long time that I wanted to move somewhere where the native language wasn't English. Because if you notice the pattern, it was all English-speaking countries, and I was like, I need to challenge myself a bit and move somewhere else. And I'd always wanted to learn a language, and Spanish seemed as a good choice. And I had also always wanted to teach English, like many people. I thought, that might be a nice thing to do, and fun. And so I applied for a program where people can go to work for the Spanish government in schools in Spain as language assistants. And people can do that from New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the US, the UK, and Ireland, like even South Africa, I think, anywhere, or mainly English speaking, I guess, can apply for this program. And I ended up in a small city in the south of Spain teaching English for a year.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So there's a theme that's happening here, is that you you sit down one day and go, okay, what can I apply for that's going to get me on my next travel experience overseas? You apply for it, and you have 100% home run record, from getting all these things.
There are so many opportunities out there if you just have a look. Like, there are so many things that I haven't applied for over the years that that I've researched and looked into. Like, for a while I was looking at teaching English in Georgia, in the country Georgia. And I was almost at the application process. I might have even submitted an application, but ended up not going because I changed tack and moved to Australia instead at the time. But yeah, there are a lot of opportunities out there to look for, and that can give you these sort of travel opportunities. Like, I always try and encourage people to look at it in a different way. Like, you don't have to save for years for like one trip. is there a way that you could move somewhere and base yourself there and keep earning money and working and travel from there, which is what things like teaching English or doing, volunteer sort of things, like obviously depends what you're doing, but that there's lots of opportunities that you can do to travel if you don't have a lot of money initially.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and I love that you're sharing that, because the whole purpose of the show is to enlighten people on all the different ways that my guests have travel, how they look at the whole travel scenario. It's such a massive industry. There's so many opportunities within that industry that travel brings us, particularly from a working point of view. It's not always about the holiday, is it? It's about being able to be sustainable and create that income where you can then go off and do other things like you've been doing all your trips through. So thanks so much for sharing that. That's really cool. My obvious question is going to be, are you going to be kicking your young boy out the door at 16 for him to go on an international exchange program, or what?
I don't know. I mean, I think I'll probably heavily encourage it. Because I do think it was a really valuable experience for me and for everyone I know that has done that kind of thing. Obviously everyone's their own person, but even just considering it, I think is definitely something I will try and get him to do.
Yeah, great. So how did you end up back in Scotland and permanently based there now?
Well, the first time I lived here, I ended up meeting someone, and which is part of the reason I was so upset to leave at the end of my 2 years.
You didn't mention that before as the reason, so now we understand there was romance in the air.
Yeah. And he is my husband now.
Yeah.
So obviously, so basically, we kept in touch while I was living back in Australia and then in Spain, and we sort of did the long distance relationship thing when I was living in Spain, which was
So what's the secret to that? Tell us, because there's lots of people that listen to my show that are really interested in that stuff. So so in fact, I've got one show that you should have a listen to one time with your husband, because it was by a lady in America who does the long distance relationship advice, and she hands out a lot of great advice. And in fact, she's got a Facebook group with thousands of people on it talking about how to manage long-distance relationships and all of it. So what was your key to managing a successful long-distance relationship?
It was tough, not going to lie. It's a tough one. It's like a bit of an emotional roller coaster. But what helped me was always trying to have the next time that we would see each other in person. So, whenever we were sort of, if he came over to visit me, or I came over to the UK, like whenever we were kind of getting to the end of the trip, we'd be like, right, well, when's the next time that we can actually make this happen in person? Because otherwise you're just kind of hanging. And I think trying to have sort of an end date in future, not necessarily a date, but like an end plan of how you're going to get out of being long distance, definitely helps as well. Otherwise you're sort of in a never ending cycle.
I promised to my guests that we weren't going to talk about the virus thing during these episodes that I'm doing while this is happening, but I am going to bring it up from this point of view, because I think there's a lot of romance going on at the moment across the world because of this virus thing, and I think that people are connecting in all sorts of new ways, and I think it's actually good that, and this is just my own personal harebrained opinion on this one, but I think it's good that people can't travel to meet each other, because it's showing how much committed they are to the process, isn't it? And getting ready to know somebody via the means that are available to us, whether it be, online FaceTime and all that sort of stuff, or emails or texts or whatever. But there's really, there's no choice at the moment, is there, to get on that plane and go and visit that person on the other side of the world. So I think I don't know whether I'm dreaming or not, but maybe there's a higher chance of romance actually being sustainable during this period for these people that are trying to hook up on long distance relationships. What do you think about that?
I think it's a tough one, because like for me, it really helped knowing when we'd be able to see each other. And obviously that's not an option for people right now. And I think the thing is, like, when you're doing long distance, it's very easy to kind of compartmentalize your life. So like that person is kind of, they're just on the end of the phone, or they're on the end of your laptop or whatever. And then you're living your normal life. And I think, to me, like if you really want a chance of having that relationship working, then you need to kind of incorporate them more into your life. Like they should get to know your friends and your family as well. Otherwise, like if you do end up seeing each other in person at some point in the future, then you know it's going to be really strange, because it's like a shock that they are now a part of your actual physical life, whereas before they weren't. Like it was two very separate things. So merging those kind of two lives into one is quite difficult, and I think that's the only kind of thing. I think the only problem I think there can be with that is that in person it's suddenly very different because they're not part of your life. So if people are chatting,
did you have a very regimented approach to a routine when you were doing this? Did you specific times of the day when you would call each other and all that sort of stuff? Or?
Not really. Like when I was in Australia, it was a bit different because we were only awake at the same time when it was like morning and night. So we were like free throughout the day. Like, you know, one of us was asleep. When I was in Spain, it was quite different because obviously it's pretty much the same time zone as the UK. So, you know, we'd always make sure we said good night and good morning. But the rest of the time, you know, I was teaching at a school, so I couldn't be on my phone all the time, and he was at work. So it was usually on like breaks and things like that. And we would try and do a call or a video chat, like even if it was for 5 minutes, but every day. But if it didn't happen, you know, because you were busy and doing something, that was okay. But keeping that line of communication open, like not leaving them hanging, was pretty key.
Yeah, right. Now, I respect that you like to keep your privacy, but are we allowed to know your partner's name?
Yes. Yeah, his name is Phil.
Phil.
And people will start to see a lot more of him on my across my sort of social media and that kind of thing as well, because we're now working together full time and looking after a baby full time.
Well, I just wanted to congratulate you both, because going through that process and coming out the other side is not something that everybody, as you just rightly said, can manage properly, and well, not only properly but be successful with it. So well done to the both of you on that one. And I'm glad that my show can also offer some dating advice for people out there who are
I wasn't expecting that.
Long distance. Well, you can expect the unexpected on this show. So. Okay, so you're in Scotland now. So we've done the tour of the world basically through you're from 7 years old and heading over to the Gold Coast in Australia from New Zealand, writing your first journal, to all the way through to now becoming a travel blogger in Scotland. Yeah, that's been a magnificent journey, isn't it, Sonja?
It's quite crazy if I actually think about it like that and break it down.
Is that the first time you've reflected on that journey like that?
Yeah, probably. I mean, in that much depth, I guess. You know, obviously I've written quite a lot on my blog about living abroad and about the different trips I've done, but never sort of all at once.
Okay. Well, now I'm going to put you on the spot with a few things before we wrap up the show today. And the first one is I want you to use 4 separate words to describe what travel means to you today. Okay.
Can I have a moment to think about that one?
Yeah, you can have as long as you like until I say I'm ready for the answer.
Okay.
So you don't have to say a sentence, but just give me 4 different words that give you some sense of description about what travel means to you. It's like one of those shows where someone's going to win $1 million, but it's not going to happen on this show.
Okay, I am ready.
Okay, away you go. What are your 4 words?
Okay, my 4 words are learning, adventure, connection, and happiness.
Wow, brilliant.
So, yeah.
Learning, education, right? It's what travel is all about.
I think so. That's why I think that was the first thing I almost thought of, because it almost encompasses the other things anyway. You know, when you travel, you learn so much about yourself, as well as the places that you're visiting and the people that you're meeting.
And both so critical as well in terms of our own growth and our understanding of the world, isn't it?
Definitely, I think so.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing those. Now, what I'm going to do before we end the show today is I thought it would be very remiss of me if I didn't take this opportunity while I've got another Kiwi on the show to give our country a bit of a plug. So I've got some questions here related to our wonderful homeland.
Okay.
And see whether we can inspire some people to book a ticket after these crazy times to go down to the land of the long white cloud and check out what we think is the best country in the world. So if you were to put a itinerary together for some foreigners who are going to New Zealand for the first time, where would you make them go to and why?
This is so tough, because I actually have tried to do this for people, because there's so much to see in New Zealand, and you need to give it as much time as you possibly can, which usually for people is only maybe 2 weeks, but does stretch up to kind of a month or so. I think that, as much as it pains me to say it, I think kind of the most
I know exactly what you're going to say. I know exactly what you're going to say. South Island, yeah. It's like, I was going to ask you at the beginning of that question, I was going to say, are you a South Island rep or a North Island rep?
Well, I would love to be a North Island rep, but I think if people are going for their one chance to New Zealand and that's all they have, then it would be remiss of me not to say to go to the South Island. Having absolutely said that, like 100% go to the North Island if you at all possibly can at all, because there is some really great things to see there as well, and it is quite different, I think.
Okay, so you've said the South Island, but whereabouts? What are the things that you want these foreigners to do in the South Island?
I think, of course, there's the West Coast. So you have the forest that borders on like the sea and has glaciers coming out of it, and mountains that are like amazing mountain ranges. So I think the West Coast and the Southern Alps kind of area and around Mount Cook and all of that as well. It would also be remiss of me to not say like the areas around Milford Sound, but I would also recommend Doubtful Sound. I went to Milford Sound for the first time on our honeymoon, because I took my husband over and gave him kind of like the ultimate Kiwi trip, and went to Milford Sound, which is like something that I had never done as a Kiwi. Like no one in my family's ever been there either. And it was absolutely amazing. But I also didn't feel like I was in New Zealand. Right. Because it was so different. I was like, I think I'm in Norway or somewhere else. So like, as much as like, yes, that's beautiful and dramatic scenery, like we also traveled down, like we just drove south of like Te Anau and everything like that, and it's kind of a really nice area, like down to the bottom of the South Island. So definitely over there as well. Okay.
And don't forget the wine region up around Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds.
The beaches and that around there. I have done the Abel Tasman
brilliant.
And that is great. So there's,
so we're going to send people to the South Island to start off with. But if we were going to recommend a couple of places in the North Island, where would we be recommending?
I would recommend around Rotorua area. Because I think because of the culture, and it's quite different as well. Obviously it smells a little bit, but that's because it has some amazing natural things to see there, like mud pools and all of the thermal
activity. The mud pools and the geysers,
all the activity and
all of that,
everything, all the geysers and that is like quite different. Because then you have the contrast of like places like the Coromandel and the Bay of Islands, where you have kind of nice beaches and things. But also on my last trip we went to Waitomo. And that was great. And we did the Blackwater rafting experience at the Waitomo Caves. Oh, that's so amazing. Like, fantastic, it was just great. Obviously it's a bit more of an adventurous activity. But if you can go and do the experience of Blackwater rafting, or I think we did, what was it called? Is where there was caving and zip lining and everything like that with glowworms all around you. It's pretty amazing.
Brilliant, yeah. One place I recommend people to go, and well, in particular, it's an experience to be had more than a destination, and not a lot of Kiwis actually know about this place, so I'll see if you've been there or if you've done it. Do you know where the world's forgotten highway is?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I haven't done it myself.
Okay, so it runs from a small farming township called Stratford in Taranaki, and it goes up through the centre of the North Island and comes out at Tamaranui, near to Lake Taupo in that area. Yeah. And it's about 110 don't quote me here, but it's about 150 odd kilometres long, this road. And it's the most picturesque road I've ever been on anywhere in New Zealand. It's just so spectacular because it basically goes up the dividing range in the middle of the North Island.
Yeah.
And you've got spectacular views of Mount Ruapehu and Ngārahoe and Mount Taranaki, literally all the way. And obviously it's dependent on weather because you need to have a nice day. But if you're blessed to get a nice day, it's just absolutely phenomenal. And I did it a few years ago, and I tell you, I was stopping every kilometre to take a photo because it was just amazing. So the world's forgotten highway. It's if you're going to go to New Zealand, put it on your list and go and check it out. Okay, let's talk about food in New Zealand. So how do you describe New Zealand food to people?
It's an interesting one because I think if I look at a menu, I could tell you that it was Kiwi food, but I can't tell you why. But I think it is a lot of fresh ingredients in that, like, obviously seafood, and then we like to use a lot of kumara or sweet potato in dishes.
Yep.
I do think we like a lot of sweets and cakes and those sort of things. But if you're talking about like restaurant menus, then like seafood or like lamb and beef and like and that kind of thing. And yeah, I think New Zealand has quite underrated food actually. I think it's quite good.
think New Zealand has some of the most spectacular food in the world.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with the freshness of the food in New Zealand.
Yeah.
I think,
I
if
agree.
you have, I've always said to people, no matter where I am in the world, you don't know what real cream is like until you've had cream in New Zealand.
Yeah, that's true.
And getting, for some reason, cows in New Zealand just give you a completely different product, right? And it's so true for a lot of other food, like I'm in Australia now and I eat snapper and time again here, but to have a New Zealand snapper is a different experience altogether.
Yeah, and of course New Zealand mussels. I miss those like all the time.
Well, seafood in general, right? So,
well, yeah, all seafood in general. If I had to pick one food that I had to live on forever, it would be seafood. But it would have to be like New Zealand seafood, preferably.
So tell us about your fetish for things like New Zealand snacks, buzz bars and chocolate fish and all those things. Are those still things that you reminisce over in Scotland? Or can you get your hands on them over there or what?
There are like online shops where you can buy things for horrendously inflated prices. But I see my parents usually around every 6 months or so. Ideally we're over there or they're over here. And so I'm always getting them to bring me like tons of snacks. Whitaker's chocolate is always high on the list.
Yes, absolutely.
As well as like pineapple lumps and things like that.
Yes.
And also the ingredients to make lolly cake.
Lolly cake, yes.
Yeah, so that I can make lolly cake.
Well, I've got a packet of Black Knight licorice sitting in my pantry, and I think it might get demolished tonight because you've just given me the flavour for that. Okay, so in a nutshell, what makes New Zealand so special for you?
I think that it's the people and the attitude, as well as obviously there's beautiful scenery and things to see, but something that really struck me when I went back as an overseas traveller, I guess, was how friendly everyone was and how fun they were. Like I did a lot of different tours and adventure activities and those kind of things because I was trying to like show my husband how awesome New Zealand is. And every one of the guides was just like great chat, really fun, made the experience like really amazing. So I think trying to like make personal connections when people are traveling to New Zealand is a really good thing to do.
Do you think you'll ever go back and live there again?
It is not off the cards. Like I'm on a pathway towards citizenship in the UK, and now that I'm on that pathway, I'm not jumping off it because it's too hard to get back on again. So that's probably my next sort of at least 3 years or so. We'll be over here, but we haven't ruled it out. Obviously, I think it's an amazing place for families. Although Scotland is an amazing place for families as well, which is part of the reason why we're still here. But I would love to have baby B kind of know that Kiwi lifestyle and upbringing a bit as well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
We'll see what we can do.
I'm sure baby B will thank you for that in years to come if that happens.
Yeah.
Now, before we wind up today, why don't you give your blog a bit of a wrap and tell us about your travel blog and what you and your good man are about to get into.
Yeah, so My blog is called migratingmiss.com. Obviously, that was when I was single that I started it. But it's evolved with me over the years, which I think makes it a really good resource, if I do say so myself. Like I've got information on there about solo travel, traveling as a couple, traveling as a family now, especially with a baby, and also about living abroad. So it does cover the whole world as such, but with a focus on New Zealand and on Scotland and the UK and on Spain as places that I've lived most recently.
Yeah, brilliant.
But my husband and I are also jumping into business together, like I said, and we have started a new site called Scotland for Families, because Scotland is a great place for families, and we love travelling here with our baby, and we want to encourage other people to travel here as a family as well. So that's kind of one of our new projects.
Fantastic.
So we also, just because we're a little bit crazy, started a third site called Scottish Scran, which is all about Scottish food and drink. And it's kind of one of the ones where we want to travel around and like try all the different food, because I think Scotland and New Zealand are very similar in a lot of ways. I think the food here is pretty underrated as well. Like everyone thinks of deep fried food when they think of Scotland, but there is some great other food here as well. So we want to kind of showcase that a little bit. So as you can see, I'm quite heavily focused on where I live at the moment, but I always have time for New Zealand and lots of New Zealand stuff about there too.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm going to put all the links to your sites in the show notes today, so people who are listening can check out Sonja's activities across those different sites, and I'm sure pick up some really good tips on, as you said, not only travelling to, but also living in some of these places. And I think that's really good advice for people, because people can go in a little bit better armed and understanding what they're getting into. And I like the way that you've shared with us today your entire journey, and you've been open about saying, well, lessons learned, and I did this differently next time around. So, having these blogs available for people now is really, really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of information that I wish I had when I was like, making the move abroad, the things that can really help you out and just make it a bit easier. And I'm always open to people contacting me as well with like ideas or thoughts on like, if they're worried about moving somewhere or they're thinking about it and wondering how they can do it.
Yeah, great. That's fantastic. And you, as I said before, you've done those things where you've applied for these different roles and been very successful through that process. So that's great advice for people. Yeah. Now, a question I ask most of the travel bloggers that come on my show is, where do you see your travel blog sites in 5 years from now?
I would hope that they are doing like amazingly well, obviously. I think
what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you for amazingly well?
Well, to me, it's like, I think that they just continue to grow as a resource for people, because as much as like travel blogs started out as like our own stories, I think, and I do think that it's important to share our own stories. I want to share them with an element of helping other people. So if my blog can continue to be a resource for other people to help them, then that would be great. So we have only recently, obviously, started writing a bit more about family travel. So I imagine that will become a bigger part of the website. But I do think that, I do want to keep that element there about solo travel, because it is still something you can do when you're married or when you have a family, and also couples travel, to keep those things on there as well, and help people who are starting out in their journey of travel as well. So I would really like it to be a really amazing resource that people think, I can go on there and find information that I want that will help me.
Beautiful. That's a lovely way to wrap up the show today. Sonja Bolger has been my guest on the Global Travel Channel podcast show today, and she's not the daughter of the ex-New Zealand Prime Minister, but she is a worldly traveller, and she's shared a lot of her amazing journey through her life so far with us today. Sonja, thank you very much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, and I would like to welcome you back sometime to talk about your future travels.
That would be great. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really good.
Okay, bye-bye for now.
Bye.
There we go, ladies and gentlemen. That was Sonja Bolger talking to us from beautiful Edinburgh in Scotland today. I get quite nostalgic when I start listening to another Kiwi accent. Wasn't that beautiful? Well, we learnt a lot, how someone can travel through their lives, starting off with their school years and end up on the other side of the world married to somebody else. Isn't that amazing? Fantastic stuff. If you like this particular episode and you want to check out more, don't forget, all you've got to do is go over to the Global Travel Channel website, which is www.globaltravelchannel.com. You'll find over 130 episodes to choose from, so you can binge podcasts for a long time into the future. And if you want to know where you download the podcast from, check out all of the links on the website. You can get the podcast from places like Apple iTunes under the podcast section. You can get it from places like Spotify, Stitcher if you've got those apps, Google Play, Castbox, and a host of other locations, which are all listed there on the website. And don't forget, if you love this episode and you think Sonja needs to be voted for in our awards ceremony, get on to the website under the awards page and vote for Sonja. There's various categories there that Sonja's genre might fit into for you. Okay, well that's about it for me on this particular episode. My name is Mark Philpott, and until we meet again next time, stay safe and well everybody. Bye for now.